Hello, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the London School of Economics, to those here in the room and those joining us online. My name is Susanna Morato. I'm the Vice President and Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research here at LSE and also a Professor in Environmental Economics. I am absolutely delighted to chair the event this evening, showcasing a special collaboration between the LSE and the International Development Non-Profit Organization, BRAC. Before I introduce the event, I just have a few housekeeping points. For those of you in the theatre, in the event of a fire alarm, please note that the fire assembly point is outside the Saw Suite Hot building, which is the new modern red brick building just outside. Please may I also ask that you put your mobile phones on silent, please now. And for those of you who would like to tweet about the event, and please do, the hashtag is #LSEBRAC. And finally, the event will be recorded, so as long as we don't have any technical hiccups, it will be soon available online. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I am delighted to introduce the event this evening, which will explore the important topic of why people stay poor. We will focus on how research and policy action can be combined to help the world's most vulnerable populations to improve their socioeconomic resilience. This involves understanding and providing effective solutions for poverty alleviation and then putting them into action and scaling them up. Together, LSE researchers and BRAC will outline a vision for the future of poverty alleviation in a changing world. We will start with a video and a few presentations, and at the end there will be chances for you to ask questions. I will introduce our speakers now. From LSE, we have Professor Oriana Bandiera and Professor Robin Burgess, who have spearheaded one of the world's longest running and largest randomized controlled trials, I think with over 21,000 households, on how to create sustained policy solutions to the poverty trap in collaboration with BRAC. They show that larger programs like BRAC's graduation program can really make a permanent difference. From BRAC, we are very fortunate to have Shamran Abed, Executive Director of BRAC International, who has been instrumental in bringing BRAC's flagship programs of microfinance and ultra-poor graduation to global scale. We also have Dr. Imran Matin, who is the Executive Director of BRAC Institute for Governance and Development, and also a visiting fellow at LSE STICERD, and he was previously Country Director for LSE's International Growth Center in Bangladesh. And finally, we have Scott MacMillan, who's the Director of Learning and Innovation, where he manages BRAC USA portfolio of research grants, along with other special projects. He is also the author of the book, you'll hear more about this today, Hope Over Fate, Fazle Hasan Abed and the Science of Ending Global Poverty. BRAC, for those of you who may not know, is an international development organization founded in Bangladesh in 1972 that partners with over 100 million people living with inequality and poverty to create opportunities to realize their human potential. All three colleagues, alongside others at BRAC, are putting research into action. BRAC is currently celebrating its 50th anniversary, and so this is an extra special occasion. At last but not least, we are also joined by Adnan Khan, Chief Economist and Director for Economics and Evaluation Directorate in the UK's FCDO, who has spent more than 15 years in the policy world as a practitioner, a policy maker, and an activist, and more than 10 years in the research world as a researcher and a lecturer, including here at LSE, where he is a professor in practice. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Scott, who will start with playing us a video, and then we'll talk about the book. Thank you very much.
He's been called one of the unsung heroes of modern times. Fazle Hasan Abed was more than just a mild-mannered accountant. As a young man in the early 1970s, he had a corporate multinational job in finance. He could have stayed on that career path and led a very comfortable life. Instead, in 1972, confronted with war and natural disaster in his homeland, he quit his job and founded BRAC, originally the Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee.
People died because they were poor. And I thought that the kind of life I was leading at the time, working for Shell Oil, I thought that this life is not really something that I'd like to pursue. I'd like to pursue something else.
In the decades to come, BRAC would become massive, reaching 100 million people in Asia and Africa. It is known as one of the world's most effective anti-poverty efforts. Abed avoided the limelight. He preferred to let his work speak for itself. Microfinance, community healthcare, education, humanitarian aid, and more. What links these diverse programs together is Abed's lifelong conviction that hope itself can help people overcome poverty. He saw that poverty was not just a lack of money or skills. People remained trapped in poverty, in part because they thought things could never change. They thought it was their fate to be poor. So Abed started by changing this mindset. He gathered people in small groups to talk about their problems so that together they could confront the injustices that held them back. They began to understand that a better world was possible, and that they themselves had the power to build it. This is the power of hope. Millions of people planning for the future, saving and investing, girls filling up classrooms, women starting their own businesses. BRAC is known for its entrepreneurial approach to tackling poverty. It is known for being efficient and effective, but it is far more than that. The legacy of Sir Fazle Hasan Abed is the triumph of hope over fate.
Human life is for a short period on Earth, and I would like that short period that each of us have to be as happy and as productive and as meaningful as possible.
Thank you, Susanna, for the introduction. Thank you, LSE, for hosting us. I thought I would walk around on the stage. It's actually quite crowded up here, and I might topple into the audience. So I'll just talk from here. I'm not going to give a big introduction to BRAC and the scale and the scope and the breadth of the activities that it does, in part because there are better people situated right here on stage, including my colleague Shamaran Abed, who is the executive director of BRAC International, as well as the son of the man seated in the paddy right there, Sir Fazle Hasan Abed. I will, however, tell one story from the book, which I think illustrates the title, Hope Over Fate, and the central driving conviction of Abed's entire life, which is that hope itself, when paired with other interventions, hope itself can help people overcome the poverty trap. Not just hope, really, but agency, not just the sense that the future can be better, but there's something that we can do to bring about a better future. Story takes place in 1974. Abed had already been working for a couple of years in a very remote part of northern Bangladesh. The poverty was grinding. He was working with landless people, no assets whatsoever. He had already encountered several big setbacks. Some programs, some efforts had failed already, even though BRAC was only 2 years old. But he'd begun working with a new way of teaching people basic skills like reading and writing. And this was an adaptation of a pedagogical method pioneered by a Brazilian educator by the name of Paulo Freire. The Freirean method was based on dialogue and discussion, give and take between the learner and the student, between the learner and the teacher. The teacher was really more like a facilitator of discussion. And the method went something like this: one word, one day. And the first day, the first word is a poster. Picture it right here. The word is house. Bari, B-A-R-I, in the Bangla language. And the teacher would ask people who would be gathered in a common place in the village, sometimes sitting on the ground, what does the house represent? What does this word really mean in the context of your everyday lives? And people would say, well, it's not just a house, it's a home. It also means the little patch of ground around my house. And if I'm lucky enough to have some livestock, includes my livestock and even my family, my spouse, my children. Are all homes the same? Are all houses the same? No, some houses are bigger than others. Mine has a hole in the thatch in the roof and it rains right through onto my bed at night during the monsoon. I get soaking wet. Well, why don't you fix it? Because I am poor. What exactly makes you poor? My wages are low. Who sets your wages? People would begin to scratch at the surface of the barriers that confront them, the nature of poverty itself. Okay. That's the first day. Second day, the word is tiger. And there's a picture of a tiger and the word is written. What does a tiger represent? And somebody would say, strength, fierceness. It's a fierce creature from the wild. It's kind of the untamed state of nature. And the teacher / facilitator would say, so can a tiger build a house? And the people would say, of course not. A tiger, when it rains, just runs under a tree. That's all it can do. And the teacher would say, can you build a house? And people would say, well, of course. If you give us the tools and the right materials, we can all build houses for ourselves. And the teacher facilitator would then say something like this. So the tiger is different from the human being because the tiger can only adapt himself to nature, whereas human beings can adapt nature to suit our own needs. And the process of adapting nature to suit our own needs through our own creative activities is the process of civilization itself. We all participate in that in one way or another. We don't wander around in search of food, but we plant seeds in the ground. We choose to do that. That is our choice. So can anybody here say something, volunteer some creative things they've done in the last couple of days? And some people might say, well, I planted some seeds, actually. I harvested some rice. I fixed the thatch on the roof, right? I harvested, I repaired a flood wall to direct the flow of rainwater to irrigate the fields properly. Gradually, the point would start to become clear. Society was theirs to own and to shape. It wasn't something given to them. And poverty itself, which had been made by human beings, could be unmade by them too. For Abed, this was the first basic lesson of human consciousness. And the way he told me that story, he said that the effect on the villagers was, in fact, transformational. They began to imagine a better future, think constructively, think critically about their situation, and think constructively about things they could do together, collectively, to bring about a better future. Remember, 100 tigers cooperating with one another still could not build a house, but men and women working together could do many, many things. To be sure, the road ahead would be long, very long. You're going to hear about some of the interventions that BRAC took to scale. It would involve microcredit. It would involve education, healthcare, agricultural training, provision of inputs, livelihood support, all these things. None of that would mean a thing, though, if people didn't first believe in the possibility of change. And the way Abed told that story, it was though a spark had been lit and that spark turned into a flame. It was the spark of hope and it was the flame of empowerment. And once those flames were burning, they became very difficult to extinguish. And that's when I remember thinking to myself, that's a cool story. Somebody should write a book about that. So here we are. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We now have Shamran Abed, Executive Director of BRAC.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much for being here this evening. I am Shamran. I'm the Executive Director of BRAC International, which is taking BRAC's work over 50 years in Bangladesh to countries outside Bangladesh. So we work in 16 countries across Asia and Africa. I'm not going to spend my 10 minutes talking about where we work and what we do, because Scott's spoken a little bit about all of the different things that BRAC does, from education to health to financial services, gender justice, now climate justice, humanitarian relief. And we work, as I said, 16 countries across Asia and Africa, most of them through direct program implementation and some through advocacy and technical assistance. But I will spend a little bit of time talking about the basic fundamental ethos of the organization. It is the only large international development organization that was born and is led from the global south. If you think of all the large development organizations that if someone had asked you to name, that you would rattle off: Oxfam, Save the Children, CARE, World Vision Plan, Amnesty maybe. They're all organizations that are from the global north, so there aren't that many that comes from the developing world. And we are one of the only large ones that do come from the developing world. So I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. So BRAC's work started, as Scott mentioned, in 1972. Last year, we celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we're celebrating it still. A few things really stand out in the way BRAC has approached development over the last 50 years, and I'll quickly talk about a few of those. First of all, just to build on Scott's point about the issue of hope. Working with the poorest of the poor, the founder and the founders of BRAC, the first generation of leaders at BRAC, realized very early on that the reason why people remain poor, which is the title of today's session, was because poverty was multifaceted and multidimensional, and there wasn't going to be any single programs or interventions or approaches. There was no single silver bullet that could address the needs of the poorest. The main understanding, as Scott mentioned a little bit, was that we can't just do economic empowerment or just social empowerment. We'd have to do both economic and social empowerment. And empowerment, because transformational change only happens when people participate in their own development. So Paulo Freire, who Scott mentioned, the Brazilian educator / philosopher who very much influenced the thinking of BRAC's early founder and the first generation of leaders. His main idea was that development is not something that is given from one person to another. It is taken. So the role of development organizations like ours is to actually take people away from being passive recipients of charity or aid and turn them into active participants in their own development. That was the first main thing that BRAC realized. And everything that we've done since in the last 50 years, whether in Bangladesh or beyond, working with the poorest people in the world, has been to try to make sure that people participate in their own development. It's not about giving aid or charity, it's about making people empowered so that they can transform their own lives. And our role, as Scott mentioned, becomes more facilitators in that development process, but people own their own development. That was number one. Number two, very early realization for BRAC was that even in very patriarchal societies like ours in Bangladesh, and as we've worked now across many other countries in Asia and Africa, including Afghanistan, South Sudan, and many other countries, which are still have a lot of development needs, we realized that it is actually the women who manage poverty. And BRAC realized that if women manage poverty in the household, then they should also be the managers of development. So making women the catalysts of change within their own lives and their families and their communities was the second big sort of realization that has shaped BRAC's work ever since the early 1970s, right? And the third one that I wanted to mention, and there are a few other things, but I don't have time, I wouldn't have time to get into all. The third big one I would mention is that there was a very early realization that if we wanted to make change on issues of poverty and illiteracy and disease, we would have to have impact at scale. We can do many things at a village level or a community level, but once we know that some of the things that we're trying with very poor people are working in terms of giving them opportunities, it is important that we scale because the need out there is tremendous. And even today, there are more than 500 million people in extreme poverty. And that number has gone up in the last few years for the first time in decades. We know there is a climate crisis that's it's not in front of us, it's happening as we speak. The number of people displaced for the first time ever is more than 100 million people in the world. So everything that we do needs to be scaled. Solutions have to have the issue of scale very much built into it. So programs need to be simple, impactful, and scalable. And in that, I'll end by saying the role of evidence is extremely important. So what do we scale? We've worked for 50 years, we've done many pilots, we've worked across many different areas of development, we've tried many things in many places, but it's very important to know what needs to be taken to scale by us as development organizations, but even in our advocacy with other organizations and especially with governments, it's really important to make sure that the evidence is there to support the programs and we know what's working and what's not working. And that really supports our ability to scale. So we know we're scaling the things that work and we can also advocate for the things that do not work. So that is very important. And in that light, I'm very happy to be here today to be part of this launch. We've had a long running relationship with the London School of Economics. Going back decades, there's been a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas. There's been a lot of research done on BRAC programs by LSE researchers, and this is taking it to another level. So I'm really pleased to be here. Happy to take questions, but I'll stop here and hand it over, I think, to Oriana.
It will be slides. Okay. I get the difficult question. Why do people stay poor? Now, one fact of life that you have to absolutely accept is that you're going to turn into your parents. And you don't even get to choose which one. So I turned into my father. My father always gave you lessons in Latin. Now, I don't know any Latin, but I was looking at the etymology of the word poverty. And it turns out that poverty means he or she who produces little. The question is why? So this is quite trivial, right? People are poor because they work jobs that produce little value and hence they are paid little. The difficult question is why? Now, BRAC programs, and that's what I'm gonna argue in my 5 minutes, not only tell us how to reduce poverty, but also shed light, thanks to the scale of them, on why there is poverty in the first place. And understanding why not only is in my contract, because it's the motto of the school, you have to understand the causes of things, but it's also the key ingredient to have policy implications. and hence scale up. So let me tell you two very different answers. Now, this is a bit like spot the differences. There are two views of poverty. The first view sees the world like this. The second view sees it like that. Now, how are these two different? Well, the first view, we can call it equal opportunities. So there are job opportunities are available to all. So it doesn't matter whether you're born poor or rich. If you prefer an easy life, you can have a comfy part-time job as a house cleaner. You work little, you earn little. You can study and become a professor at the university, or even more hardcore, you can become a CEO of a company. You study a lot, you work a lot, you earn a lot, and you don't have time to spend it. But everybody has the choice. Okay? That's one view. The second view, the poverty traps view, the ladder is very different. There is a step which is very, very tall. Okay? It's the red step over there. So if you're born to the left of that step, there's no way you can climb. No matter how many houses you clean, you're never going to have enough money to get a degree. Okay? Now, the problem is that we see house cleaners working part-time and we see CEOs, but we never see the ladder. So we don't know whether people stay in low productivity jobs because they want to, or because they would really like to climb further, but they can't because they face this big red wall. BRAC implemented one of the most successful poverty reduction programs, known as the graduation program, starting from 2007. We evaluated it starting from 2007, and we followed people for a good 11 years. Now, the cool thing about this program, aside from the fact that it reduces poverty, which is the main thing, is that it gives us a glimpse of the ladder. That is, it places people precisely in that part which we can never see. So it takes people who are casual workers in agriculture, maids, domestic servants, and it gives them an asset. Mostly think about this as a cow, which in these villages is what the rich women do. So there are no CEOs in the villages where BRAC operates. So effectively, what BRAC does is that it puts people on the red step. And there, if we look at them for long enough, we can see whether they go up, suggesting that they've always wanted to go up but couldn't, or whether they come back down, suggesting that they never wanted to go up. So what we find is that most people keep going up. There is about a quarter to a third that comes back down. And you know what's the difference between the two? That the quarter that comes back down didn't have enough assets at the beginning. They were so poor that notwithstanding the large transfer that BRAC gave them, they couldn't get to the red step. Okay? But for the vast majority of them, they just escaped. And within 11 years, they were buying land, which was unheard of, just unimaginable to them 11 years prior. So what do we learn from this? We learn that the red step, it's very tall. It takes about 1 year worth of income to overcome that step. Imagine somebody who joins the labor market with no money, no bequest from the parents. How can they possibly save 1 year worth of income that they don't have in order to invest, say, in a university degree? So the question that arises is it worth it? Because true, it reduces poverty, but is it worth it? Now, this requires a change in perspective. That is, we don't have to think of this as a social assistance program that year after year gives people 1 year worth of income. That would be unsustainable. If you look at the ladder there, once you bring people up beyond the red step, which we call a poverty threshold, they will keep climbing on their own. So this is not a regular transfer. This is a one-off expenditure which pays off in the future. So poverty reduction is effectively an investment. We shouldn't look at poverty reduction as a current expenditure. It should move onto the capital expenditure sheet of the government budget, because it's a one-off payment which gives a continuous stream of benefits in the future. And you will never need to pay social benefits to a person ever again. So the last thing that I'm going to say is that this is a long collaboration. We have 5 waves of data, about 23,000 households in 40 sub-districts of Bangladesh, 40 BRAC branches, hence 20 sub-districts. We follow them regularly every 2-3 years. And now we're going to make the data public. So any questions that you might have that we haven't answered in our papers, you can go to this website, which is written very tiny, but we will distribute the information, and which I can't even click unless this is a touch screen. It's not, okay. But the website looks exactly like that, because knowing that this wouldn't work, I actually took a screenshot. So you can go on the website and download the data and ask your own questions about poverty. Okay? There's plenty to do, plenty more to do. And I thank BRAC for these wonderful partnerships that has taught us so much and so much more to come. So I give the, I think we're done.
Yeah. Thank you. So my name is Imran Mateen. I'm with BRAC University. I'm the executive director of an institute of BRAC University called BRAC Institute of Governance and Development. So I want to actually, talk a bit about the importance of research and learning at BRAC, and in the context of the partnership we've had with LSE last 15 years, but also talk a bit about what we're thinking about the future. So the first thing is really, one of the first thing that's important that I would like to highlight is BRAC is a learning focused organization. I think it's learning is central to BRAC's ethos and the way BRAC is, and right from the beginning of BRAC's formation, learning has been fundamental and central to the way BRAC has thought about how change and effective change can actually happen. BRAC's approach to learning is by doing. It is through iteration. It is through experiential learning, but it is also through formal and systematic research as well. So BRAC has always tried to combine these different ways of knowing and ways of learning, different modes of learning, to really create a very learning-oriented culture within the organization. And this is all, I think, evidenced by the fact that BRAC, which was formed in 1972, as you just heard, as early as 1975, BRAC has had its own research and evaluation division, which was within, it was an in-house research cell within BRAC. And some of the foundational research that laid the foundation for BRAC's strategy in terms of BRAC's programmatic strategy was based on, very deep ethnographic research, trying to understand the rural power structure, the rural dynamics, rural power dynamics, which was actually sort of fundamental to BRAC's rural development strategy. And in 2001, BRAC set up a university. It's as a continuation of the whole learning-oriented ethos and a real belief that systematic formal learning is fundamental to any any society's development, but also to create functional elites for the society. In 2001, BRAC set up the BRAC University. And in 2018, BRAC also decided to transition BRAC's in-house research and evaluation division, which was in-house within BRAC, into BRAC University, essentially to create more independent, more credible, and more higher quality and more rigorous research and evidence behind BRAC's program. The ultra-poor research that Oriana just now talked about is actually in 2007, we started the partnership with LSE. It's actually the largest and the longest term RCT that has been running. I think India was another one, which is I think was done just after that. And the ultra-poor evaluation that we started in Bangladesh in partnership with LSE actually, led to an inspired 6 other country evaluation, which altogether I think constituted a very, very important evidence base in terms of the ultra-poor graduation approach, which is not only about an approach, it's actually about a philosophy. It's actually a way in which we can think about social protection in itself and how we can think about why poor people stay poor. So I think it is much more than an approach or a program. It is really underpinning a particular way of thinking about poverty with very, very strong and rigorous empirical roots, which actually is now, I think, creating a lot of important policy discussions in terms of how social protection itself should be addressed and should be thought about as investment and not as recurrent expenditure. And I think this is exactly how high quality research and evidence combined with very strong programmatic foundations can create global public goods. And this is exactly what we want to do much more of in partnership with London School of Economics. So I would like to end there and give the floor to Robin, who will talk about the future in terms of what we plan to do. Robin.
Very much, Imran and Susanna. Okay, so same question as Oriana, but I think I'm going to sort of take a slightly different approach. So my job is to sort of connect what we've been doing for the last 15 years, which is all about poverty reduction, to climate. And the way I was thinking about this was that the effects of climate are so unequal. So let me just show you, since we're at the London School of Economics, a little bit of evidence on that. So this is a graph, some work that we've been doing in India, which is nearby. And each of these, this is from 1957 to 2017, we have for every district of India daily temperature data, and we're regressing that on mortality. And the blue line is the US, the counties in the US, and the red line is India, okay? And what's interesting here is that the same weather, so what you're looking at is the mortality effect of taking any day, any of these temperature bins in Fahrenheit. So let's take the highest one, above 95, so above 35 Celsius. And in India, the same weather variation leads to a 0.75 increase in mortality, whereas in the US, it has a negligible effect. Okay, so last night we were at a dinner, and Scott here was talking about something that Sir Fazle Abed said, which was that his sort of moment of awakening was he was out on some islands that been hit by Cyclone Bola, and a lot of people were killed. And he was sort of asked, what can we do about this? And his sort of realization is it wasn't the storm that killed the people, it was poverty. And what we're getting at here is something similar. So if we then take India, we break down India into rural and urban. This is the rural picture, which looks very much like the overall picture. This is the urban picture. So the same weather variation, literally the identical weather variation spreading across Indian districts between 57 and 2017 is leading to this enormous effect in the rural parts of India, with basically no effects in the urban. So when we start to think about climate change, it's not that it's just the weather variation that matters. It's the fact that the effects on people are going to be very different. And that's where it sort of then connects to the thing that Oriana was talking about, which is, if you think about people in poverty, which are a lot of the people in this graph here, so these are people, a lot of people working in agricultural laborers, domestic servants, doing very itinerant jobs. There's a lot of excess mortality when it gets very hot, right? So if we're thinking about poverty reduction, suddenly we're no longer just in the world of thinking about, well, what's going to get people out of poverty? We're also thinking about what's going to make people resilient to climate. And the terrifying thing, which I'm about to show you, is what's going to happen in the future, which is here. So this is a graph where in the blue, you have the number of days in different temperature bins in India for the period that we were looking at, which is 1957 to 2017. So for every district, we have daily temperature data, and we binned it up. This is for all of India, but we have every district. And remember that each day above 95 or above 35 Celsius had an increased mortality by 0.75%. But there was only about 4 of those days on average in this period. Now there's 42. So this is looking in the period 2080 to 2090, so the end of this century. And of course, this is already happening. The shift is already moving to the right. So what you're seeing here is like an immense challenge, which is this weather, which is coming, this hotter weather, and this is not the only climate challenge, is going to have a very, very significant negative effect exactly on the populations that Sir Fazle Abed and BRAC and son Shamran Abed are focusing on. So what that means is we need to come up with innovative methods to get people out of poverty. And the thing that I wanted, and just to scare you more, this is the effects by the end of the century on life expectancy. You see sort of ceteris paribus, by the end of the century, rural Indians will lose about 10 years of life from these additional days. Whereas the effect on urban India and on the US, much, much smaller. So I won't show you any more graphs, but I wanted to sort of finish with something which is new, which is blue, something more optimistic, designed by Oriana, the logo. And what is blue about? So what blue is about is that the work we did with BRAC. So in 2006, I was in Bangladesh, and I was taken to see women in the pilot stages of the graduation program. I suddenly realized something had happened. It'd been 2 or 4 years in. So I spoke to Fazle Abed, Shamran's dad, and to Imran. We started thinking, well, can we look at what happened then? And our realization, the thing that Oriana showed, is that you needed basically a big push to get people into different types of jobs. You couldn't just give them a little bit of money, because then it wouldn't change the work they're doing. So I think the major challenge we're going to face as we go into a period of hotter climate and more frequent storms is, how do you get people in those jobs where they're already in the 1957 to 2017 period of time, so that they can become more resilient to climate change. Now, we've talked today about the graduation program. That's obviously great, and that's spreading, and we're going to support that and see how we can adjust that to make it more, to help improve climate resilience. But I think you want to think a little bit more broadly about that. And what blue is going to do is it's going to connect environment to ultra poverty. And the main sort of central idea is that you have to do things like not just provide assets, that's one route, but you could provide human capital, you could provide finance, as long as there's enough of a transfer so that people moved into different types of jobs where they'd be more protected. Or indeed, if they move to different areas, like from the rural to the urban areas, where they become more protected. Because that is going to be the challenge as we go forward. That could also involve making markets work better, making infrastructure work better. And we spent the day with BRAC trying to figure out what fits in here. And I would say that we got 20% of the way in terms of at least identifying some areas. So I think how we want to continue is to continue to sort of discuss, send students to work out what are going to be the interventions that might actually protect people in the future, because the graphs I've shown you are really indicating that this challenge is a major challenge. It's not something that's going to be solved a sort of marginal change. We're going to have new ways of doing things in order to protect population, not just in Bangladesh, but in sub-Saharan Africa, other bits of South Asia, and the developing world. Because remember, the first graph I showed you showed that the US, the same picture would hold for Europe, are not the places, even when they experience the same increase in temperature, they're going to be as badly affected as populations in Bangladesh and development. But I will stop there. Thank you very much.
So many years ago, while I was visiting a small village in northern Bangladesh in Rangpur district, I remember I can never forget the conversation with a teenage girl who told me her story of how she was born in an extremely poor family. And she thought that once she gets married, her life will change. And she said that once she got married, she discovered that her husband was even poorer than her. And she said that, in her words, she said, my life ended at that point. And now think of a teenage girl, think of your own kids, our own daughters at that age. When we think their life is just about to start, think of what a poverty trap does to people. They think their life has ended. This was an example of a classic poverty trap. She didn't have the capital, both the human capital, the skill, the education, but also the financial capital, resources to walk on those ladders that Oriana mentioned. She was also not protected from the shocks that she suffered. And she was stuck in a trap. The same is true for millions of other people around the world, where the traps are not just limited to their own situation, but also the societies that they live in. They live in societies where there is conflict, there is violence, states don't function, there's low economic growth. So there is fragility trap, not just poverty trap, but also fragility trap, violence, conflict. There's also low income growth trap. Low income leading to low investment, leading to low production, low income. And it's very hard for societies, not just individuals, but also societies to come out of that trap. And if you look at the world today, like if you look at both the moral and the policy challenge, the poverty trap and the fragility trap that I'm mentioning is one of the most fundamental critical issues that we are facing, which is also a huge issue because we collectively have the resources to address it. But unfortunately, we're not in a position to, we've not been able collectively as a world to be able to do this. Now, that girl that I was mentioning from Rangpur was fortunate because she became the beneficiary of the BRAC ultra poor program. And I could already see her life changing, and she could also see her life slowly and gradually changing. The same is true for many, many, many other girls, millions of girls in Bangladesh and elsewhere in the world. The same is also true for when Bangladesh started growing, millions of girls started finding jobs in ready-made garments in other sectors because there was growth happening. And I see both those as complements. Effective development interventions are organizations like BRAC, which are mission motivated, which are doing, implement both designing, but also implementing very effective programs. Changing the lives of the poor. But also states and markets also creating more opportunities in the economy. Both of those are complements, and once we see those processes happening in the rest of the world can change. So today we saw very powerful examples of how this process happened in Bangladesh through BRAC. So Sir Fazle's message, hope over fate, is something that we should remember each day of our lives. But he believed in this mission, but he also, and BRAC also practically demonstrated it not just to be an aspiration, but their day-to-day work also being guided by very rigorous, both design, implementation of program, but also something that marks this from many, many other organizations, which is also a deep, very, very deep learning ethos. A deep commitment to something that I think Imran mentioned and something that Robin and Oriana were also involved in, a deep commitment to learning and error correction. So whatever we are doing, let's evaluate it, let's do how we are doing, and then course correct, adapt, course correct, and then do better. That also became a pathway for them to do better things both in Bangladesh, but also a great example of a South-to-South collaboration, an organization from the South and doing things, creating knowledge that was an example or a model for the other developing countries, but also then expanding its own work in Africa and rest of Asia and other countries. So I'm very fortunate myself to have been still part of two organizations that have both been supportive of BRAC. LSE, Robin, Oriana, STICERD, I see Jonathan, Sarah, IG International Growth Center, others. Like LSE being deeply committed to BRAC. I also work for FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, and UK government has also been deeply committed to poverty reduction, poverty elimination, I would say, through effective program, pro-poor programs, which is both working with effective organizations like BRAC in designing and expanding those programs, but also working with governments and markets to create more opportunities for the poor, because the two work in complement with each other. And I think both by ability to work with partners, to designing effective interventions, by ability to work with governments and markets to create more opportunities, but also especially creating the knowledge about what works, what doesn't work, how it works, when it works, that could also address the market failure in how effective policies could address the problem of poverty. And UK at its best, when it does its job, it has become a development superpower, not just by spending money, but doing it smartly through supporting programs, through supporting governments and states, and also creating the knowledge that will help others to do this. I'm very glad to see so many young people over here, and I think you should take Sir Fazle Abed's message of hope over faith, reflect on it, but also think of what he and others did to make it a reality, which is working on a daily basis. So rigorous design, rigorous implementation, how you do this, but also creating the knowledge base to help expand the program. My final words would be, I think you should think of your careers at studying at LSE, maybe working for effective intervention organizations in your countries, organizations like BRAC, but also some of you in a little bit of a commercial break should also work for UK government and FCDO, always looking for opportunities. So it's a great message. Let me stop it. Thank you. Thank you.
What goes the computer? Okay, we're going to listen to it.
Good morning, everyone. I wish I could be there in London in person. However, there were other plans by the universe, so I could not be here. But I just wanted to send this message to let you all know that how excited we are about this initiative. I think we all know that there are very urgent development challenges facing the world right now. And it requires high impact, scalable solutions with high return on investment. And it's not just implementation on the ground. Research and policy action are vital to this. So that people are supported on the ground, the interventions are measured for their impact, so that solutions can be scaled and systems can be changed. As we face the increasing impacts of climate crisis, we all realize that this is kind of impending. A lot of the development outcomes that we have gained, hard-earned outcomes we have gained over the last few years, and it is about to also change how we do development going forward as well. And coupled with that, of course, is the cost of living crisis, rising inequality. So all of this makes it imperative that we all work together with our own strength and skill sets. That's why we are very excited about this major new collaboration between BRAC and LSE, which we call BLUE, where we confront the twin challenges of extreme poverty and climate crisis. We have a beautiful Bangla name for this collaboration. It's called Unnoyon Eshona, which means the development discovery, which encapsulates our core attitude towards development. We do not know every solution, but we are always on the ground, listening, learning, doing, and evolving, and trying to discover new solutions. Of the plethora of impacts of the climate crisis that we get to hear about, how much do you actually hear about the role of reinforcing effect it has on the poverty trap? There is the small, strong interconnectedness. As we are listening, we are seeing. There is a human face to the climate crisis of the people living in the situations of poverty, attempting to break the poverty trap, but all of a sudden an extreme climate event, or worse still, slow onset climate change effects, putting a halt or even reverse their hard-earned graduation gains. Climate change is having a very unequal effect. People hit the hardest by the effects of climate change, contribute the least to its causes, and are often less protected from shocks. At the same time, economic growth is essential to continue to lift people onto sustainable pathways out of poverty. So with this context in mind, it is essential to climate-proof poverty eradication programs, and we're looking to do exactly that. BRAC is mainstreaming a climate resilience lens into all of its future development activities and strategic planning, ensuring participants are targeted based on both extreme poverty and climate vulnerability levels. We are also focusing the specific needs of climate migrants and climate vulnerable urban population living in extreme poverty. The program encourages movable business to reduce risk from natural disasters, promotes climate tolerant home gardening, shares information on disaster risk tailored to the region and the season, and works with people to form community-based climate resilient groups. Now, all of that is true, but nothing is more important than ensuring alternative livelihoods for people. So all our programs will be focusing on also enabling people to build resilience to climate shocks by providing with climate resilient livelihoods, providing them with proper insurance package, which is going to be part of the financial inclusions, and connecting them to existing social protection programs, encouraging savings, having multiple sources of earnings, and coaching them into more disaster management skills. So now going forward, there will be new technologies and policies that will be needed to achieve transformation. But we'll have to marry the technology with the human interventions. Oftentimes, technology doesn't work for the poor. So we have to make the technology innovations work for the poor, just like we did years ago for the market. So making the market work for the poor through our social enterprises. Now, this sort of connection to new innovations that are happening globally and locally, we need to look at them, and we need to ensure that these are cost effective, these are frugal, and these are embedded into the local solutions that are going to be crucial in terms of climate adaptation. We need to think about the new circular economy. What are the opportunities that it's throwing up? Digital markets and jobs, again, making it work for the poor, redesigning of training, microfinance coming up with new types of products and services, asset transfers, and investments in new energy, transportation, and climate defense infrastructure, all as means of both increasing resilience to climate change and also potentially look at this as an opportunity to accelerate poverty reduction. We believe that there is always a way. If we work together, no matter how big the challenge is, this time the challenge is very big indeed. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to see how this collaboration evolves in the coming days. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. So we've heard some powerful presentations and some inspiring talks. We now have around 20 minutes for questions from the audience. So are there microphones here? Yeah, okay. So please, I will take 3 questions at a time, and please make the questions brief if possible, so we can fit in as many as possible in the time available. Okay, so who wants to go first? Are there people on the top? Okay, so the man here in the second row, please.
I congratulate you on the work you're doing. I think it's a good thing. However, I find it, I really struggle to have a conversation about why people remain poor without talking about the other side of the coin, how rich people become richer and protect their riches. When I think about those steps, I don't think that the cleaner will be allowed to go the way, because there will be fences and there will be barbed wire and there will be a broom pushing them back. So to some extent, I feel as if poverty is a resource for rich people because the people do more than they are rewarded for. My father worked for a tea estate a long time ago, and I read in a textbook which say one of the prerequisites of producing tea is cheap labor. So yeah, there's my dad, cheap labor. So, and then I think also there's the fact that, and I don't want to make an accusation, but it's a challenge to you, that even the charities or organizations which understand this tend to be stymied from speaking up, because actually they rely on the rich people to finance their work, or even universities actually. So to me, it looks like the poverty trap is not because people are not trying or because they don't want to, but actually there is an active power that stops them from moving out of that trap, because it suits people to have people cleaning their toilets and their streets at very low prices.
Thank you. Another question? First row there, please.
The model that you have of the big step up and the need to have a considerable amount of help to get up it, and then you can look after yourself the rest of your life. Does that model work for individuals, or does it actually work for all of the poor? Because any one person you help up the ladder will be doing fine, but don't you need a certain number of people to keep sweeping up and being the maids and so on?
Thank you. And one last question. I'm going over to this side here, please.
All right, thank you. My question, I think, is going to build on what Madam there said. I think for me, what is also missing from that model is how long do people who move out of that poverty trap, how long do they stay out of that poverty trap? Like, because I think there have been studies using your own data that have shown that people tend to go back, to fall back after a period of maybe say 9 years. So yeah, you can check on that one. And I think also maybe just to make a comment on the issues around climate change, as I think the other presenters made. There are also a lot of other programs that also happen, for example, in Bangladesh, including the work that World Vision is doing with Noble Jatra that also looks at layering of programs with other issues around DRR or disaster risk management programs, as well as WASH programs. So that would be like one of the ways in which you could also consider looking at issues of graduation program in the event of climate change and changes of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have some very interesting questions. Who wants to go first?
I guess many questions were about my step model, so I'll go. So the first question, we are in complete agreement. I might have spoken too quickly, but what the research suggests is not that the poor don't want to climb up, but they cannot climb up because the step is so high. Now, we don't find the political economy story behind why the step is so high. There are technological reasons to believe that the technology plays a part, because if you're very poor, you can never afford a cow. But I agree with you that there is a whole interesting sort of a field to explore of who's making the step higher than it should be. Who's making it hard for people to borrow to buy a cow? Because undoubtedly people who are born on the other side of the step gain from being on the other side of the step with the people unable to climb behind. So there is definitely a political economy story. We can't answer all questions in one paper. I think the main aim of the paper was to shed light and prove that empirically there is evidence that people are in the trap, not because they want to, but because there is the step is too high for them to escape. Because once you give them a chance to escape they will. And linking to the question how long they go for, we follow them for 11 years. And we're going to go back to the field, hopefully, to do another round. At the 11th year, they were still going up. So the trend was always improving. They were accumulating assets and growing more. And to your question about can this solve everybody's problem, that is a very important question, because you can take some households and make them better off, but how do you make everybody better off? Now, in three sentences, I'll try to explain how. If barriers are eliminated, you move to a new economic equilibrium. So of course we will need cleaners, but cleaners will not be underpaid as they are now, because if the cleaner has the option to go get another job, he or she will demand more to clean your house. And so the prices will adjust in a fair, in a fair world where everybody really has exactly the same opportunities. Jobs that are less pleasant will be paid more.
Anyone wants to add to Oriana's
Just one, I mean, it's not a, I think this whole program or intervention is really focused on the ultra poor, the poorest of the poor. So we're really talking about the poorest of the poor inching up to the next level and getting into, an occupational trajectory that is, kind of a different kind of trajectory than it would be without this intervention. But this trajectory is not going to necessarily have the kind of intergenerational outcomes to really move into, the higher level trajectories as well. So I think we need to continuously, kind of explore what are the other interventions that can create new trajectories for, and then for each and every, more complex trajectory that we want to create, there's going to be, more complex questions of political economy, power structure, and so on and so forth that we'll have to basically address. So I think one needs to sort of understand, what we're trying to essentially kind of do here, which is really focusing on the poorest of the poor, right? So those are who are at the bottom, less than $1.25 or $1.9 per person per day. So that's really at an extremely low level that we're talking about here. Maybe not even the maids. That's actually the occupational trajectory, perhaps after graduation of the program that happens.
Okay, we'll take 3 more questions. The woman here at the front first.
I'm sorry, my knowledge of economics only very much scratches the surface of what you guys are talking about. But developing countries like India and Bangladesh are currently experiencing rapid growth. So how do you think global, like world leaders and governments, what do you think they can do to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor within these rapidly growing nations? And do you think it's possible to distribute wealth and opportunities equally eventually?
Thank you. More questions over there? Okay, could you pass the behind you? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the incredibly interesting discussion and to the incredibly interesting points that have already been made. While mentioning the graduation program, made me think of a comparison between the NGO Give Directly, which basically just provides the asset transfer or the cash transfer, however you want to call it, and has provided evidence that that is extremely effective. So I was wondering what you think about the thought of just stripping the program down entirely, for which you can argue you can make a lot more impact by giving the money that saves that directly to poor people to sort of bridge that gap and get them to the other side of that line.
Okay, and one more question at the back there, gentleman at the back.
How effective
Okay, I don't know if we could, you heard.
Yeah, we
you
could,
heard,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we repeat.
Okay. So who wants to, thank you very much for your questions. Who wants to start?
Okay, let me try the growth one. So I think it is, on your question, it is basically a, what we're describing as a form of growth, because the person who is an agricultural labor who now takes on the cow business becomes more productive, right? So they're better off. And I can remember saying that's not the sort of end of things. They might do something else. They might move to the city, move to a garment job. But I think you were also asking about inequality. So that the fact that, there is growth in Bangladesh, there's growth in India. The really striking thing of when we first went to Bangladesh, this 2005 and 6, when you went out into these areas of Bangladesh and you met these women, this was like medieval. I mean, they were living in houses with just thatched roofs. They were almost all illiterate. So the issue here is actually bringing those jobs closer to the kind of more productive jobs, which are more like, in the modern economy. But it won't happen like in one step. So going back to the question of the gentleman at the back, this can be done in many ways, which is why I was mentioning that there's different routes. We're looking at one route, but it could be that you get a training, a bunch of training, 6 months of vocational training, or you get admitted to a university, and all of those things will leapfrog you over the red step that Oriana was given. So the idea here is it's a principle of big push, but what is in the big push, as long as it leads to a better job, doesn't really matter. That's the sort of idea. But if you don't get the big push, you remain in the bottom.
Yeah, I just would add to that. On that question, I mean, I'm from Bangladesh and I've seen during the course of my lifetime how much the country has progressed in terms of economic development. But unfortunately, the tide doesn't lift all boats. And what we found is that the ultra poor, or the poorest of the poor, their poverty is so entrenched and their vulnerability and their marginalization is so deep that unless we go and target and properly address the needs of the ultra poor, they remain trapped in that poverty trap. So countries like India, of course, even further along in its development journey, but is the country with the largest number of people in extreme poverty. Of course, because India is huge, but the absolute numbers of people in extreme poverty are highest in India. So, we do need governments and civil society organizations to really look at this issue of the poorest of the poor and try to design programs that can really address the needs of the poorest of the poor. And on the issue of give directly, or just giving the cash or just giving the assets, again, I think there is evidence on that as well. Obviously, for certain groups of the poor, you could potentially just give cash or assets and they would do well enough. But again, our experience is when you work with the poorest of the poor, that is not enough. And 50 years of work in some of the poorest countries in the world with some of the poorest people in the world has at least taught us that we do need graduation type programs that build not only an asset base, but agency and self-worth, and also the wraparound services, the mentorship, the training, all of that you need to do. Otherwise, I mean, just to say that, you can just give the poorest of the poor some money and they'll figure it out on their own, and is something that, at least in our experience, has not been the case. And I think beyond our programmatic experience now, there is also evidence to suggest that that won't be enough.
Especially when it comes to long-term impact. You do see strong impact on unconditional cash transfers and short-term boost, but when you really limit it to the poorest of the poor, long-term, Oriana and Robin, have really shown that the impact of graduation.
Okay, thank you very much. I will take 3 more questions. Okay, the gentleman here at the front with the brown jacket.
My question's my question's on on poverty being a function of hope. Firstly, how did these individuals and families lose this hope to begin with? I mean, what are the mechanisms behind that? And whether your research that you've done, I know it's in extreme poverty, is it applicable to here in the UK? Is poverty here in the UK a function of hope, or is there something more?
Thank you. Any more questions? So the woman here on the 3rd row.
Thank you for the talk. My question is that this entire study is based on the ultra poor and how giving them an asset would help to lift them out of poverty. But there are a section of the ultra poor who are way below that. And the first thing to give them would be probably a roof over their heads. And with the problem of displacement, which becomes more important given climate change, the cost of transferring assets, productive or otherwise, to these people goes up. So in that case, my question would be that, does there come a point when the cost does not justify the benefits? Because with displacement, limited resources are becoming more limited. So then the benefits would come down.
Thank you. And one final question from over here. Black top.
So my question is on the step diagram that you presented.
The step
Diagram. Sorry. I'm wondering about what we can do to those who fell back to the step. I think that's about 1/4 of the whole sample, if I remember correctly. So I think, are you assuming that there is like a common threshold for all? Because you just pretend that it's like for all of the people who are below the step, there is like a common one, and you just provide them with the same amount of help, which is just a cow. So are you assuming that a cow can bring like all of those who are below the step to the step. Because for those who are all the poorest of the poorest of the poorest, it could be the case that they need much more to get to the point where to the higher step. And it could also, or is it the case that for those who are the poorest of the poorest of the poorest, they just need the government to persistently give them funds to get rid of poverty? Because I'm just wondering. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. 3 great questions again. Who wants to go?
I think we should conclude on this question because it's an excellent question. So in order, for sure there will be people who won't be able to undertake a productive activity which is, which generates enough income to meet their needs. So there will always be need for social assistance. So the poverty traps results do not rule out government assistance altogether. But the percentage of those people is probably quite small. Your intuition is absolutely correct. The amount of the transfer that you have to give for people to overcome the threshold depends on how much they have to start with. And the difference can be as little as $50 or as big as 500. So all the ultra poor were very, very similar baseline. But because the step is very steep where it starts, then even small differences can make a big difference. Now, for the 25% roughly who came back, it's important to stress that they are not worse off relative to where they started. Because although they didn't accumulate more assets, they didn't lose the one that was given, or if they lost it, it means that they sold it, and so their consumption went up. So for them, you can say that the worst case scenario is that the program is the equivalent of a cash transfer, a very generous cash transfer. You get the cash, you pocket it, you consume it. But for 75% of them, roughly, it's a way out, a stable way out of poverty.
Yeah, and I think there was this, I think among the ultra poor, there would be quite a bit of heterogeneity. And I think that's one thing I think, the ultra poor graduation program have really, tried to understand and sort of design the interventions to suit different types of, sort of key heterogeneous group, if you like. I mean, right now there are three groups at the sort of the lowest level is social assistance program that, and trying to connect with, kind of, and have better targeting. You work with the government to have better targeted and, social assistance program and connect, people at the lowest level. And then you've got others where the transfer size or, the kind of the design is sort of slightly different. So I think understanding the heterogeneity more is one of the key features of the contextual adaptation of the graduation approach that will have to be part of its learning agenda, sort of continuously.
So a couple of thoughts from me. First, on the issue of how did people lose hope in the first place? I think it's important to remember that for a lot of these people, they didn't have a lot to begin with. Because if you're the ultra poor generally tend to be people who are ground down by generations of poverty. So their grandparents were ultra poor, their parents were ultra poor, they're ultra poor, their lives are within that village. They've never left it. They have no assets, they have no skills, they have no education, they have no income. I mean, they might have some income, but it's very unreliable. And you can imagine that if you are in that situation where the generations before you were in the same situation, you're in the same situation, you have children and you don't see how they're going to come out of this situation, it's not a very hopeful situation. So I think the whole idea of hope, and I think Scott said something very interesting that he said, hope is, it's almost misleading to say all you need to give people is a little bit of hope. Right? But hope is more than just it's really agency and self-confidence and belief in yourself that you can have a different future than what your past has been.
It's also not an irrational response.
Yeah.
Right. People have good reason to be hopeless.
Yeah. And obviously agency over fate was not a good title for the book. So hope over fate, but it really is more than just hope. It's about really thinking that with effort and with support, you can break out of that cycle of poverty. So I think that's really important. And very quickly on the issue of people who are displaced. So again, let me just say one more thing, because a couple of you mentioned, giving a cow or an asset transfer. The graduation program is not just an asset transfer, right? It has an asset transfer and a big push investment as a very important part of it, but it's only one part of it. There are many other elements of the graduation program, which is what makes it different from give directly, which is just give an asset, give some cash, right? There are lots of wraparound services. So for households where they have problems with housing, that is something that the program would try to address. If you don't have a sanitary latrine, that is something the program will try to address. If you need access to government transfers or financial services, that is something the program will try to address. So it really does try to look at a multitude of needs and tries to address as many of those as possible. So that does, as you said, grow the cost of the program. But I think what Oriana said in her presentation, if we see that as an investment rather than as an outlay, I mean, it has very strong returns on investment. And I don't know, Oriana, if you have evidence on the fact that is there a point, as you asked, where the investment becomes so big that it's not even worth doing? I don't know if
well, there will be different forms of investment that will be worth doing at that point.
And I think one just final thing on climate change, the thing you mentioned, which is also leading to more displacement, the costs of the people who are being displaced, is going to go up and up. And so one key principle we have to remember here is that if you make the upfront investment that then allows them to escape future displacement as the climate gets worse, then the fiscal the return basically on that investment becomes more and more worthwhile because the future displacement will be larger and larger. So this is really what's critical here, because when we started doing that, what Sir Fazle Abed said to us is, I'm really only interested in programs at scale that will meet not just hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. And what we're talking about here is millions of people being affected by climate change. So you need to then think of things that will actually now, where we take action, that will offer future protection to people against displacement and poverty.
Okay, I'm afraid we have come to the end of our session. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you for your excellent questions. And please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists for the most powerful program.
Yeah.
Do
we sit, stand?
Can you put the logo on?
Put the logo on. Yeah, we need the logo. Yeah, we need the blue.